This episode contains content that may be alarming to some listeners. Please check the show notes for more information.
Hello everyone, this is your host Manoj Tandon with another episode of Dark Rhino Security Confidential, and today we actually are honored to have a guest on that really doesn't need any introduction, at least in the InfoSec space. He certainly does not. People know him, people follow him. He is Mr. Kevin Metcalf. Kevin, for those of you who in the off chance don't know him, is a former federal agent who turned prosecutor. He's an author. He's the founder of the National Child Protection Task Force. And the task force brings together a whole bunch of recognized experts in a host of different fields, such as legal, OSINT, cellular mapping, analysis, to really help children come back home. You know, Kevin has assisted with the recovery of numerous missing children, missing and exploited children, I should say, and the identification and apprehension of sexual predators in multiple states. Welcome to the show, Kevin. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much. We got to start with, OSINT. And there's a whole bunch of questions here around this thing. First of all, what is OSINT? What disciplines are involved with it in actually making this thing work?
If we go back into looking at the history of intelligence, if we look at intelligence gathering, when the Air Force became really powerful, the military and the government were looking at intelligence and saying, well, we've got technology now, we've got aircraft that can fly over anywhere, we got satellites starting up, we don't really need human intelligence anymore.
Yep.
Turned out to be very, very wrong.
Absolutely.
We paid the price for that. So the gathering of intelligence, on human intelligence especially, you look at classified systems and all that data that's there and all that information, back a few decades ago. Well, just think, and you're in the InfoSec space. Think about right now, instead of all those humans going out and writing little notes in their pockets secretly and listening to conversations and trying to get in there, what if instead of having to really get in and do some social engineering on these people or try to get in where you can hear them, what if they just put everything out on the internet so you could find it, if you could find it? Well, that, in open source intelligence before the internet was newspapers. It was, anything that was generated there. So it was openly available, any kind of news, any kind of information, reporters were big on all that. So now just think about what all we, and I say we, people everywhere with internet access, think about the selfies we put out there. Think about the information that we share. Think about this thing leaking location information. And most of the time we're just freely sharing this. And then you've got the big tech companies where location and all this information, that's big money to them.
Oh,
because they're crowdsourcing. They're just taking everything because they're giving you a free app. They're giving you a free tool. They're giving you something of value that you really want. And in exchange, I went to law school, so a contract, something of value in exchange for something of value. We're giving them our data and saying, I want this free tool. I'm going to hit accept. I'm not reading any of these privacy policies or terms of service. Not going to read any of that. But I'm going to hit accept and give you whatever you want because I want this free thing.
Yep.
And we're never satisfied. It's never satisfied. So thinking about all of that information going out, and then you think of the drama where one person writes comments on another person, or you say, you see people holding their driver's license up on social media, it's just insane. But the amount of information out there, we can determine who they communicate with, which circles they run in, what their email addresses are, what their phone numbers are, IP addresses. So we know so much about people because they just freely throw it out there. But you have to have people who know how to search through that mess, triage it, validate, verify, and make actual intelligence out of it.
So now, if you had access to Google's vast databases, I imagine this exercise would be infinitely easier to do.
Oh, it would be. Yes. But as you know, technology changes every day.
Yes.
Meta changes. These social media a new one will pop up. They'll change their platform. They'll change their terms of service. They'll change something in response to either public pressure, political pressure, government pressure, or something. So these capabilities, we have to constantly keep researching, figuring out new ways of finding things.
Kevin, you've been a prosecutor, so you have a strong legal background. What I want to understand about OSINT is what is really admissible as OSINT-based evidence. Is there, so for example, unless I'm publicly sharing on Facebook and that post is available to everyone, but if I just share to just my immediate family only, is there not a presumption of privacy there? And then if that data is used, does that come under some kind of a conflict with search and seizure laws that we have? Or
okay,
yeah, how does this? I mean, even with the phone, if I know that AT&T is sharing with this day so many apps on here, like the Weather Channel. People, who those of you who are using it, is sharing when it's on. It's sharing everything about you. But if I lock that out and I'm trying to limit that and I'm saying my settings have been as limited as possible, if that data were used in court, would there not be a defense here that says, look, we configured this to the best possible way. There was no intention of sharing, and the gathering of that intelligence is completely against search and seizure rules in the United States. And he can't admit it. Just curious.
So you're covering multiple levels here. So let's start off at one level. So let's say, even excluding law enforcement, just make this very, very simple. There's an attorney-client privilege where the attorney cannot disclose anything that he and the client talk about, right?
Yep.
So what if you're sitting in your favorite Italian restaurant at a small table, and right behind you, about 12 inches, is another chair with people. There's people sitting there, people sitting over here. You're in an area where there are people, and you and your attorney are discussing a very important trial that's coming up. They're discussing your case and your private information. You're sitting there discussing that. And it's anybody sitting around can hear that. That level of protection is not the same. There was a famous case, and I'm going blank on the name, but let's say you're standing at a phone booth and it's open and you're standing there, you're on the phone having a discussion. There are people standing right here beside you and behind you waiting to use the phone.
Okay.
It reminds me of the military. Back when the phones had the cord, you're standing there like this trying to talk, and you got guys standing behind you looking at their watch saying, the drill sergeant's coming. But you're trying to have this conversation. They're listening to everything because they'll harass you later in the barracks. You don't have any expectation of privacy in your communication. Now, what if you have a phone booth that's got a door? So there's a case where law enforcement stood outside to where they could hear inside that booth. However, what the courts are saying is that person closed that door because they expected privacy and they expect you to respect that. Yeah. So when you start applying this to technology, there are different levels. And then you have the plain view doctrine. If let's say I'm in my house, I've got the blinds closed, the doors closed, and I've got contraband. Let's say I've got a drug lab that and it's just something that's apparently obvious to law enforcement, but they can't see it walking in front of my house. Now, what if I open the windows up, and the public street is 15 feet away, and law enforcement walks by and they see in that open window, that's obviously a drug lab. It's immediately apparent that that's illegal contraband. Well, then they can take action. They can go get a search warrant to have access to that house. So we kind of have to step back and look at the expectation of privacy, and do you have an expectation of privacy in whatever this situation is that you're talking about? Now, if you're talking about social media, now Clearview comes under fire a lot.
Okay.
The state of Virginia, I believe, I testified for their legislation at some point in the last year. But they took a recess and had their lawyers look at Clearview's data, how they got it, where they got it. And they determined there's no problem because it was all open source. It was all data that the public freely exposed to anybody out here. And we have done tests. So I've taken people whose face, I know that they have closed social media, closed Facebook, closed Instagram, closed whatever. Their privacy settings are where they should be. Those images never show up in Clearview as far as we've tested. However, if your settings are open to the public where anybody can come and access your account and see that, then you'll see those results often turning up in there.
Yep.
So now we're looking at the next level. So I can get, let's say, subscriber information and maybe this number called that number, some little who you're talking to type information on a subpoena. Then you've got a D order, which is under 18 USC 2703D, which will allow me to get transactional data. What URLs you visit, or search terms, maybe something like that. And then you go to a search warrant, and that's where I can get the images you share that you store. I can get videos. I can get what you're talking about, the content of all of that. But in order to, a D order and a search warrant both require going before a judge and getting a signature on it. The search warrant requires a little bit more level of proof.
Okay.
And it's really hard to distinguish, this level from this level when you try to describe it. It's like me trying to describe the color blue in some situations. But, as you see, you've got stuff that's open to the public that can be easily heard. And if you try to put a barrier in there, you've got more expectation of privacy. And then if you have these absolute privacy settings on there, that requires legal process to get into that data.
So, I'll tell you, we had Mia Lansom on a year ago or so, and she's in a similar line of work to you, and has done some incredible work in getting child pornography and things of that nature off the web with law enforcement.
I would like to interject something right here, because we are trying to educate the public. When you hear terms like child pornography or kiddie porn, people think, oh, these are like kids standing in the bathroom, in the bathtub, or, they're posing for the camera, like a 16, 17-year-old posing for the camera. And it's not. These are some of the most horrific rape and abuse of children that you could ever imagine. So we often refer to it as child sexual abuse material. So I just want to point that out.
No, thank you letting that's actually a horrible fact, but it's a fact, unfortunately.
It is.
And but one of the things she said was that a lot of this stuff goes on openly in Reddit, and this gets back to OSINT, and she was like, well, but it's in closed Reddit groups. Right. And then again comes the question of, at least now she's in Europe, so I don't know what the European rules are around this. But in the United States, would that still fall under an expectation of privacy? And do these people hide behind that curtain to get away with things?
Okay, so in that case, again, if you're having a conversation with your attorney that's private and it's protected, if you include your buddies in there in that room during that conversation, they can pretty much talk about it because they were there, they were sitting there, they had a right to be there because you didn't exclude them. So when you start getting into these group chats, if you got one person in there that can say, hey, I'm taking screenshots of this, I'm going to report it, that's illegal activity. And that information alone would be enough to get legal process to examine who's in that, what's going on, and what's being shared. So, there are steps that can happen there.
Yeah. And, I'm glad you're telling us this because I know the work you're involved with is, unfortunately, as you described, it involves horrendous things. But at the same time, we have a bunch of teenagers that are doing a bunch of very stupid things on their social media platforms. Right. And they need to understand this as well. Don't do stupid stuff because it's not all private. And so hopefully it saves someone's career or enables someone's life to go forward and not end up inadvertently in an innocent act that follows them for the rest of their life, And
unfortunately, we're having a lot of predators now who are pretending to be teenagers, and AI is becoming problematic in this realm. But they're able to pretend to be a teenager. And if you look at what's known about CSAM, child sexual abuse material, these rape videos, abuse videos, and imagery, a lot of them we know we know there are millions and millions of known images that we know about. So we're always on the lookout for first generation. So unfortunately, we're getting a lot of sextortion is a big, if that's not on your radar, it should be, especially if you have kids in your life that you care about, and you should care about all of them. So, sextortion, this is a way that they can get access to more first generation material. But
Really?
What we're dealing with, if you remember back to being a teenage boy.
Yeah, we had no phones, man. We didn't have any of this stuff.
No, we didn't have, but that feeling like, my parents don't know anything. I've got this figured out. I know everything. Nothing can hurt me. I'm going to drive 150 miles an hour. And that mentality still exists, and it exists with this stuff right now, that they know everything. And it comes to the point where once they get in trouble, it's way too late. You can't back up.
You're absolutely right. And I had not heard of sextortion. This is the first time I've heard that term be used.
Yeah, unfortunately, NPR put out an article. So there's a sextortion documentary. Stephen Peake was a producer of it. And sextortion is something that we've been seeing worldwide. It's a worldwide problem. I was at Interpol in March. I was in Australia in April, and it was a big topic of concern amongst the child protection investigators and people that work in this space. And so if you think about law enforcement worldwide, or let's say in the U.S., you can go to any sheriff, any chief, and say, during let's say a press conference, say, hey, sheriff, how many stolen vehicles did you have last month? They'll say, oh, I got, this many stolen vehicles. How many residential break-ins? How many burglaries? We have this many. How many commercial? This many. We value our stuff. It reminds me of George Carlin, but we value our stuff. And we measure what we value. Now, if you go asking most of the chiefs, most of the sheriffs, most of the law enforcement heads around the country, how many missing kids do you have in your jurisdiction? How many are found and what's being done about it? They'll just say, I don't know.
Really?
Because, it's we don't value, I say that. We don't measure that, which is shocking. And what if you go and ask the foster care system, how many missing kids do you have out of foster care? How many kids are not where they're supposed to be right now? They'll not give you an answer. They don't have it. So we don't really have accountability for our children. What about reservation kids? Unfortunately, you hear this term called throwaway kids. But anyway, in a lot of ways, you got two different avenues. So financial sextortion, and this has been going on for quite a number of years. Financial sextortion is, so you're on social media, right?
Yep.
How many times have you had this beautiful woman in a bikini contact you, say, I want to be your friend? We need to connect.
Not that many, actually, it has happened. And so part of it is just me. Nobody wants to pay attention to me.
But it happens. I get them. So I get them. Teenage boys get them. Teenage boys, especially with self-esteem problems. You know what it's like trying to get a girlfriend and date and do all that stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Well, they will attract these boys. It will move on to like we're talking right now, the shared video, and they will talk them into exposing themselves, into doing things on the camera, in exchange. And then next thing they know, they'll send them a packet, and it'll have, here's your friends list, here's your family, here's this video of what you were doing. If you don't send us 500, 2,000, whatever it is, this is going to be released to everybody. So this is financial sextortion, and it primarily hits guys. It's a male-focused thing. Girls are also hit, but a lot of times what we'll see with them is you see an attractive girl. You go look her up, and this goes into OSINT. And the bad guys know OSINT very well. They'll go find her email, find all of her emails, start looking in breach data, finding passwords. They'll start logging into credentials. And then if they hit one that's got like Snapchat, Google, whatever, and she's got inappropriate images in there, that suddenly is a way to extort her into giving more images. Oh. And we've had in the U.S. about 20 deaths at this point. That was the last number I heard. So 20 suicides at this point because of this. So Sextortion, hopefully your audience, if you don't know about it, there's a Sextortion documentary. I think it's on iTunes still. Stephen Peake did it. And what I was going to say is that he got numbers, and we don't measure this. So the numbers he got were kind of all over the place. And he put those numbers in the documentary, and NPR came out with this news article saying, well, it's really not that bad because the numbers don't make it, don't match this. Which, I was telling Stephen, they're not going to match it because we don't measure it. Those numbers don't really exist because you'll have one agency measuring something, another agency measuring something else, this one measuring something else. We really need to get together, come together as a government and say, this is important and this needs to be measured. But then when you think about it, what is the statistic of extorted, sextorted, exploited, trafficked, abused child? How many children does it take to be statistically significant?
I don't even know the number, but I think even you can't even do this with one. I mean, that's really bad.
Yeah. So how do we get a statistically significant number for everybody? But what it comes down to, and I owe this to an attorney I was recently talking to, and she said, when this becomes statistically significant is when it's your kid. That's when. But unfortunately, most of these kids are in poverty. They're being abused by their own parents, their own people in their circle of trust. And all of this is happening that way. These kids have nobody, no voice, nobody to talk, speak up for them and stand up for them.
And is that the passion that drives you? Is that why you focused on children so much your whole?
Yes. Well, my whole life before was, law enforcement, come from the military, state, local, federal law enforcement. And I've only been prosecuting about 12 years, but, I focused on terrorism, counterterrorism was a big part of my life. A lot of shooting, a lot of fun stuff. But when I started prosecuting, I was looking for a place where I could add value, and that happened to be in technology. So most of the prosecutors, even now, most of the prosecutors are still not fully comfortable with electronic evidence, with social media, with cell phone data, with all of that. So I said, I'll just jump into that. I've got some familiarity with the investigative part. So naturally, I saw elders being abused and being taken advantage of. I saw adults being hit on these scams. But the big thing that hit me, I got to tell you, you watch one child rape video with the sound on, it's not going to.
Nope, not going there because you're never going to unhear or unsee it. I'll take your word on it.
It haunts you, and that becomes really the focus of your life. This has got to stop. I have to do something about it.
So how is the take up of what you have developed? You've pulled a group of people together to do what needs to be done. Has law enforcement taken strongly to this, and are they actually investing resources of their own now to use OSINT-based techniques, or the uptake really slow, or more can be done there? What's the story there? Or are they relying on you purely to get it done, Kevin?
Yeah, well, the goal is for us to be able to interact, and we take on, I think this year we're going to hit more than 2,000-3,000 case assists, easy. And, wow. And that's international. That's not just in the U.S., that's internationally. So for us, Abraham Lincoln said, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend 4 hours sharpening my axe. Well, I figured out early on, the only way to really sharpen your axe is to work multiple crime sets. So we work terrorism cases, drugs, guns, property crimes. We work anything and everything where technology touches criminal behavior, and we do that internationally. So that exposure to all these different fact patterns and behaviors and everything else we're learning, we're constantly learning different lessons. And we collect that methodology, that tradecraft. So that's what we really do, is develop investigative tradecraft. So now we've got OSINT, but we've also got professionals who are prosecutors. So we've got legal process and strategy. We know where to look for the data, how to ask for it, what to ask for, what language to use. When we get that back, there's a flow. Sometimes we start with OSINT and develop things that go into the legal side. And then we also have closed source tools that are sensitive tools, law enforcement sensitive, that you have to have a reason because it's monitored. So to access that, And you can see legal, closed source, and open source, all of this flows into each other and feeds into each other. And that's what we had discovered. And that's where the real power is. And then we've got vendors like Multigo, SpyCloud, Shadow Dragon, Clearview. We've got who is XML API. We've got, and I'm going to leave a bunch of them out. I got OSINT Combine, Chris Poulter out of Australia. We're using all these different technologies and different data sets. And we take on the most difficult cases law enforcement has. A lot of them they will hand to us and say, we've exhausted everything. If you can find something, please let us know. We work directly with them. So we always have to have a law enforcement agency with jurisdiction or we don't do the job. But we'll come in and help them brainstorm it. We'll give them legal process. Say, you need to ask for this. And when that comes in, you need to do these things with it. And it's the flow. It's the flow of information. And, we have over $1 million worth of tools and data donated to us every year.
Fantastic. Could you give an example that doesn't divulge techniques and procedures that of a really difficult case that you guys really helped solve that was going nowhere by traditional approaches?
We had a couple. Let's see, which one do I want to choose here? If you follow me on LinkedIn, I just reposted, and I can't remember the person's name, but he did an excellent walkthrough of geolocating from a video source. So we have done from terrorism cases, some other drug crimes, human trafficking. So from all these, we get images, we get imagery, and we didn't need to know where the picture was taken and when. So being able to take this video, and if you look on my LinkedIn profile, you'll see this excellent walkthrough of geolocating, picking out clues in the images. So if you look back 10, 15, 20 years ago, like your skill set, the skill set to stay out of reach of law enforcement and prosecution, to be outside of detection, used to be really high. You used to have to have a lot of tech skills. But now that bar is lowered because criminals gather and they share information on, well, this is how this guy got caught. Don't do that. This is how this guy got caught. Don't do this. And here, this was in this article. So they collect all that. And they have tutorials and the technology is just there that allows them to hide so much better. That causes its own problems. So now we have more problems finding these guys. So sometimes all we have to deal with is the imagery. And those can be a big challenge. We have tracked international cases and made substantial, some pretty significant arrests and rescued kids based on nothing but starting with images. And that is a skill set in and of itself. And I got to say, it's an addiction once you get started in it.
Because I always, we always have heard of the stories where law enforcement got the garbage bag. They figured out what plant it was made at. Yep. And from there, they went and tracked down where it was sold and then geolocated I'm just making this up. I think that was actually a plot line in some movie I saw somewhere.
They picked bits and pieces, but there is, there's something to it because for me as a prosecutor, I've got to look at, well, Google is given this, Facebook's this, TikTok's putting this in. I've got a witness statement that, connects with this. I've got DNA evidence and fingerprints. What is the story? What does it tell? You got to fit all of this together for multiple people, and it tells a story.
Where does this come into the picture? And I know you literally wrote the book on it. So,
well, some of it. Yeah.
What's the story of OSINT and cellular devices? I think actually 3 of your books are still available on Amazon. I went and looked.
Yes. They are. I have not. I've been very, very busy with other things. I got to put out there. I haven't updated those things since 2017. So everything in there was accurate as of that time.
Okay.
But I've got another guy. I got Kyle, one of my investigators here, who he's worked with me for many, many years, and we put him into some training, some in-depth training, and then my office, the prosecutor's office, paid for him to go to a subject matter expert course on mapping and analysis. So he's my guy, even though I do know this really well. He's the one that dives into this in depth. So when you start looking at this with cell phones, and the technology behind the phone itself,
Yeah.
is not nearly. We're wrapping a supercomputer around kind of, in my opinion, old technology. It's not near advancing nearly as fast as the computer and all the rest of it. So you got this old telephone system. I mean, there have been some upgrades, and now we're looking at 5G and the possibility of 3D mapping, which is pretty substantial. Yep. Anyway, you start looking at combining that. So everything happens on this thing, right?
Yep.
And one of the things I was pointing out in the UK and Pakistan and some of these other places where I've taught, you don't have people going into your cell phone store and saying, hey, I want the terrorist version of that cell phone, or I want the drug dealer version or the child predator version. It's all the same thing. The physics are all the same. Now, behaviorally, we're going to be looking for different things. But if you know how these things work, and I know in depth on what cell phone records, what the data looks like, the engineering data even when it comes back. And back when I started, there were very few mapping programs, and they were pretty pricey, and we couldn't afford any. So I put myself through training with the FBI's CAST team, with the Secret Service, their National Computer Forensic Training Institute, and went some other stuff, plus my background. And I started learning how to interpret the data that was coming back in these reports off of subpoenas, search warrants, and all that. And the Carpenter case several years ago pointed out that the amount of data that is leaking out of these things is, if you look at an extended period of time on how these things operate, you can see so much off a pattern of life analysis. So now if you think about not only these cell towers that are connecting everything you do, you're also probably driving around, or you're in the car and you're texting somebody. You're hitting somebody up on Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok or WhatsApp, whatever it is. You've got some activity going on. You're taking a selfie. You're actively engaging with this device that is exchanging information. And it exchanges information through Apple, Google, and then the internet. So yep. There's a lot of trails and understanding kind of this picture of how all these different things flow and what they look like. And quite honestly, the way that this really clicked in my head was putting a couple of major cases together for trial. And I have to explain how all this stuff fit together to a jury. But it's, you've got the background in this stuff, that all these connections.
Yeah, no, we were, to the audience, we were talking about Signal 7 before we started taping. And what I'll do is make sure we put a link in the show notes to that. Signal 7, there's a lot of great documentaries and things that are out there that you can go and watch and learn more about it. But as Kevin was saying, that we've taken something that's highly modern and it's sitting on top of somewhat of a dated infrastructure, and it's left gaps. I'll just leave it at that. And yes. and these devices are probably the biggest data leak. Like most of our work here at Dark Rhino is working with businesses, and they're always like, what's my biggest vulnerability? I'm like, that's easy. Well, doesn't take any rocket science there. It's your mobile device. If you actually want anything to be totally secure, leave your mobile device at home. Right? There's a reason why when you go into a federal agency, you have to leave your cell phones at the door and metallic devices at the door. If no one's been into such a facility, it's an interesting experience. But
it is. But you also know that pattern of life analysis, when you start really digging into that and looking at extended patterns of multiple layers of data, those things where I'm going to go commit this crime, I'm just going to leave my phone back here. Then you start looking at this thing, and then you start seeing this anomaly that there's something odd going on here, and so you're kind of screwed both ways. If you're a person who's super active on this thing, and then all of a sudden nothing, that creates questions of itself. So it's very hard to really get away with a lot of stuff. And
you look at Ted Kaczynski, right? The Unabomber, that guy was a recluse. I don't think he carried one of these, and it made it very hard. I don't.
Not having one. How are you? Then you got to go back to the old methods of.
Yeah. And how many people know those? I know last question, because I know we're heading up on time and I want you to talk about some of the things that you have going on. The ADPPA, what's your opinion about that?
All right, so believe it or not, I am very pro-privacy. I'm a big Michael Bazzell fan, and all that. And I actually help people be more private. I have tried to help my family members and my friends to be more private. I have been hired by major corporations to come in and target their executives because they've been spearphished or been targeted in other ways. But you have to understand your threat. What is your threat platform? What are you looking at, and what are you comfortable with? Not everybody's comfortable being the Michael Bazzell tinfoil hat wearing, as he refers to it, guy who drops his phone into in silent pocket bags and all this stuff. I mean, if that's you, the level of awareness that you have to have about everything you do, and you can't have a new car either, because that's like a cell phone on wheels. So there's so much stuff that you have to be aware of that you're going to come into. So you really have to find a balance in this. Like what is my threat level here? What am I looking at realistically? So for me, I used to try to be private, but obviously now I have to be out. I have to tell a story. We have to educate the public on the reality of all these horrible things happening to our most vulnerable people. So I'm out there. My face is out there. Everything's out there.
Well, welcome to the club.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So how do you? So that there is a need to protect ourselves, but there need to be things carved out for like NGOs like myself that work directly with law enforcement. We've got agreements with law enforcement to help with with the analysis. We've got oversight, or just to have law enforcement itself should have access to this data. It should not be erased, because this shouldn't shock you. As criminals go through their career, their lifespan, their career, they get better. They get better at hiding. Oftentimes where we find the mistakes they made, it's way back. We're following the trail back to where they made a mistake. And I think that data, that intel should be preserved and should be allowed to be accessed for certain things. And I think they should be for very important things, because it takes time, it takes knowledge, it takes understanding and expertise to go through that data, to make an analysis, and then to vet that analysis and to do your due diligence investigation to make sure that you're right. Because there is no algorithm out here, no facial recognition, no anything that should be able to tell a police officer, I ran it through, I think that's your guy, go arrest him. That can't happen. You have two things in play here. You've got technology, which changes every day, rapidly changes every day, and you've got the human element. We have to focus on that human element and educating them to the weaknesses of the technology they're using. Let's say facial recognition.
Yeah.
The only thing, if I took a snapshot of your face and I put it in one of these programs, it would go through and say, I think here's 10 images. This is the closest match I've got in the data I have that looks like him. Then what you have to do is I would have to go through each of those. I would have to look for, some sort of environmental clues, tattoos, birthmarks, whatever. There would have to be a due diligence investigation before you take any further steps. We have to protect privacy both ways. And we have the investigative methodology that I think put up the safeguards to do this.
See, and I don't know how this is different from the times of Al Capone. I mean, back then they had books, and if you wanted those books,
right,
it took a degree of effort, a level of understanding, and took some creative element to get access to them, right?
Right. And what you're going to see, I mean, this is my opinion, from what I've seen for the last 10 plus years working this, and seeing the dark web manuals on how to find a child, how to groom a child, how to abuse a child, how to stay out of trouble, how to keep from getting caught. What's going to happen is this law is going to go into effect. Most people are going to look at it and say, that's interesting. I'm good. I'm safe. And they're going to go on with their lives and ignore it. The bad guys, they're going to go through and say, hey, this is a gold mine. This is such an opportunity for us. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to write out a description, and I'm going to post it on these dark websites of here's what you do, here's how you protect yourself, here's how you keep from getting caught by the police. They're pretty much the only ones that are going to be benefiting directly from that. I think the general public, the public, I don't think, while they mouth off about it, I don't think they have the energy to actually worry about what they expose online, because we're so used to this. It's so convenient. And we're so used to saying, I'm going to take this selfie.
The public has chosen convenience over privacy.
Yes,
it really has. I mean, that to me is the bottom line. And
it is.
They just have. They've settled on it. And
yes. Yeah, and I get accused, or people in my spot get accused of fear mongering. Like, oh yeah, children are getting raped. That's fear mongering. You're just trying to scare everybody. It's like, because I've seen thousands and thousands and so many of these over the years, and there's so many new ones that are being identified every day. But then you try to expose that to the public, and the public's like, oh, yeah, I don't like that. I'm going to go over here to this puppy picture or the cat or the whatever else. I want something that makes me feel good. I don't want to know about that. Because going back, how many children does it take to be important? It takes your child. And that's, unfortunately, most of these children are either in poverty, they're in the reservation kids, they're foster kids, or something is, they don't have that level of love and protection from a responsible adult.
So, Kevin, we are at time, but I wanted to give you a minute here to plug anything you would like to. What would you like to let our audience know about that's coming up, that's that you'd like them to look out for?
Well, the National Child Protection Task Force is having its annual conference next week. So we have investigators, we have technology professionals from all over the world converging in Northwest Arkansas for a week to share information, and we got some really exciting things coming. We work closely with some other NGOs, and I got to point out Glenn Devitt. We talked about OSINT. So Glenn Devitt with Sentinel Foundation, he was responsible for actually coming in and teaching OSINT back several years ago, and he drugged me into Black Hat and all these other places as his assistant. So I was so lucky to be right there with him, and he just took me and said, here, this is how this works, do this. And he mentored me and my team for many years. So we work very, very closely with Sentinel Foundation on all their stuff. Lantern Rescue is another one. They're doing tremendous work right now in Africa and Ukraine. So we've got a tremendous group here, the people, the ATII, Anti-Human Trafficking Intelligence Initiative. We talked briefly before this about cryptocurrency. Larry, Cameron with that group is phenomenal at cryptocurrency. So I just kind of wanted to say something about our partners that we work very, very closely with in this space, because you can't do this alone. You just can't.
No, and you guys are doing fabulous work, and we are absolutely grateful for it. Kevin, we didn't even get through half these questions, but I guess we'll save something for next time, hopefully. But we really are honored to have you here, and I know our audience appreciates it. So I got to say thank you. It was
thank you. I appreciate it.
It was just fantastic.